Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. So today I'm going to be restoring this beautiful jar candle that I have. First of all, I did make this. I ended up making it with, I've got some beef tallow in here, I've got paraffin wax, I think I've got even a little bit of beeswax and stuff like that in here. And I scented it with some lavender essential oil. Now here's the thing. When you make candles, you want to make sure that your wick is centered. And I did on the bottom here, but I poured my wax too hot. And one of the things that happens with candles is you'll get a sinkhole if your wax, when you pour it, it gets too hot. It collects on the sides of the glass and it will collect to the wick, but everywhere else it'll kind of drop and fall. And that's what happened here. So it's actually accidentally poured or pulled my wick off to the side of my jar. Now this wick is the appropriate size, however, because I poured my wax too hot, I've got my wick pulling this way. Now this is the problem. When your wick gets too close to your edge and it's too hot for the size of the jar that you have, you're going to end out with a crack in your glass. It can explode that way, so definitely you want to make sure that your wick is the right size for your jar. One of the things I like doing is using like a big pan like this, filling it full of wax and putting a wick inside of it, and then I will test my wick from there. However big the melt pool ends up being, which here's my melt pool rings right here, I'll burn it for about 2 hours. However big that melt pool is the size of jar that you should use for that size wick. I will do a video demonstration on how to avoid problems like I did with this one here, and you can make safe candles that won't burn countertops by having wicks too close to edges of containers and things like that. So I'll be doing a further demo on how to do that, but for now I'm actually going to restore this candle. Again, it's become a little bit unsafe. I always watch my candles, I'm always right next to them when I burn them, just because it's a safety thing. But we're going to restore this candle today. So I've got my wick set up here, I've got everything I need, I've got my extra jar that I will be using as well. I've got a container. I love using metal containers when making candles because they are easy to wash, and if you heat them up, they're not going to crack or break like glass can, and they just tend to hold up a little bit better in case you overheat things like I sometimes do. Now here is the assorted wax combo that I made the candle with in the first place, and I'm just going to go ahead and stick this in my container because I want to fill up my jar all the way up. So I'm going to go ahead and set these things aside, and we are going to have to clean out the wax because you want to make sure that you get all the debris, everything back out of it. You can use a wire strainer like I've got here and just line it with a cloth, and that will strain out all the debris. But because I'm going to be using a jar, I can actually put that fabric over top of my candle once I get the stuff melted and just pour it out. So I'm going to show you guys how I'll do all of that great stuff. So what I'm going to do first is I've got my pot. I'm going to do this as a double boiler. I'm just going to go ahead and start pouring some water into my container here. And I'm going to go ahead and just set my glass jar, my candle, right into the cool water. Now I'm going to put this on the stove and start to heat it up very slowly. The hot water is going to melt my wax and not burn it, which you don't want to burn your wax, it's not good. So this will help to melt all of this down, and then we'll be able to do further stuff from there. Okay, so I've already got my candle sitting with my double boiler on the stove, and it's going to go ahead and start melting now. I need to go ahead and prep my jar. One of the things that you do need to do is make sure that you heat your jar up. That's going to help make sure that the wax, when you pour it, it's going to set correctly, and it's not going to leave interesting little lines and jagged things because your glass is cold, so your wax, when you pour it in hot, is going to try and cool it off, and it'll leave little rings and things like that in it as it's trying to cool as you're pouring. So make sure that your glass is nice and toasty before you go ahead and pour your wax. But right now I'm just going to go ahead and prep my wick. So I've got little bit of a glue dot right there. It's kind of cool. You can use a glue gun if you want to. You can actually even make your own wicks. You can use a washer to be an anchor even for your wick if you want to. But again, always burn test your wicks to figure out what kind of jar or what size container that your candle is going to be held into. Now, if you have a problem setting your wicks, you can actually use a straw, and that will kind of help keep it centered. I like using glass jars because you can find out exactly how centered you need to get that. And that looks really good right there, so I'm just going to go ahead and press my straw at the very bottom there, and that helps to set my wick. Now again, if you pour your waxes too hot, what's going to happen is that glue dot is going to come undone from the bottom of your container, and you really want to make sure that everything stays, you know, anchored down there, because that's going to help keep your wick straight up and down all the way through. You can take a tongue depressor, popsicle stick, whatever, that works too. I'm just going to bend my wick over the top of my tongue depressor and put a clothespin over that, and that's going to help anchor my wick to be straight up and down my container as it is drying. So that way, hopefully, when I pour my wax, that as the wax settles, it won't try and pull my wick down into the jar. So that's what I'm going to try and avoid this time. I'm going to make sure that that stays nice and tight and secure. There we go. That's better. Alright, so now my jar is pretty much ready to go. All I have to do is just heat this up and it will be ready to pour my wax in. But for right now, I still gotta wait because my wax is melting. So we'll be back in a little bit. Alright, so now that my wax block, the whole thing is completely melted. It is beautiful. It is clean. Now, I need to make sure that I wipe off the outside of my container because I do not want any water to land inside my jar. What's going to happen if that does, if I do get that little bit of water inside my candle, is first of all, oil and water do not mix. I've said that before in many of my other videos. But if you add water or have any water droplets inside your wax, and you try and burn your candle can explode. So that water hitting that wick and the fire, it'll just pop, and you don't want to have that. So that's why I make sure I wipe off the outside of my containers all the time, especially if they have been sitting in water. Now I'm going to go ahead and start heating up my glass container. So I want to make sure that everything's going to adhere correctly. And again, I'm wearing my glove because that's just much safer. I'll slowly heat everything up. While I'm doing this, I'm just going to kind of let my wax cool off as well. So again, I don't want to pour it really, really hot because that can actually dislodge my wick from the bottom of my container. We don't want that. We don't want everything to fall in. Also, I'm having to remake this candle this time. It's because I did that. I'm going to go ahead and set my glue gun or my heat gun aside. It's not quite toasty enough. You can actually sit your glass jars inside a warm oven. That works too. And you just pull out the jar when your wax is ready to be poured into your candle. Gonna keep heating this up. Now what I'm looking for as well is my wax needs to start forming a skin on the inside of my metal container, and I'm not seeing that yet, so it's still got to cool off. And once my wax is cool enough, I'll go ahead and get ready to pour that. Okay, so my wax is still cooling off, but it's starting to form skin along the top side of my container. The reason for that is the top area of my container is cooled off enough that it's allowing that wax to cool along the side. What I am looking for is that skin layer to start forming right on the edge of my wax, and that has not happened yet. So it's still got to cool off a little bit more before it is ready to pour. I've got my jar ready. It's really nice and toasty still. I've got a tray here. This is what I'm going to use to catch the rest of the wax that's not going to fit inside my candle. And I figure, hey, why not for the heck of it? If you're not able to make candles or burn them in your home for various different reasons, you can actually melt your candles down and pour them into a container like this. This is a silicone. This is for making candy, chocolates, things like that. You can actually pour your wax directly into here, and then you can make your very own wax tarts from your candle, and then you can put that in a wax warmer and it will expose that fragrance, and you'll have that throughout your home, and it's just wonderful. It'll last a really long time, and then you don't have to worry about burning a candle. So I thought, might as well make a few of those while I'm at it, since my wax is already still cooling off and everything. Gonna give this a go, and it's starting to form that wax skin right on that edge there. So I can tell it's ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and feel my container. I think I want it a little bit hotter. Just a tad though. Doesn't need to be much. Alright, setting this aside, I'm going to go ahead and start to pour my wax. I'm going to set this aside right there, just kind of pour it in to right about there. That looks good. Now this is going to need to set aside and cool overnight. I've still got some remainder wax left over, so I'm just going to go ahead and just for the heck of it, just pour a few wax tarts. I can use these later on if I need to. Also, if I did accidentally pour my wax still a little bit too hot, I can take one of these tarts and do an add back where if I do get a sinkhole start to form inside my glass container, I can use one of these tarts to help fill in those holes back in, so that way my candle will burn as it's supposed to. I overfilled a couple of these. Don't quite need them to be that full. There we go, that's good. And that'll be fine. Just gonna go ahead, pour the rest of my wax in there. Now I can use my heat gun and take all the rest of that wax off the sides. But this is all ready to go, and I can set this in the fridge where this will solidify really quickly. I can do the same thing with this one, but this needs to be set out and just kind of set on a countertop where it can't be bothered, where nothing's going to happen to it, because I don't want this to cool off too fast. It's just gotta, if I do stick this in the fridge or freezer, I found out that in the glass jars, the wax can break. Now if they're in a tray like this, it doesn't really matter because I'm going to reuse them and melt them anyway. But I want to keep my candle looking as nice and perfect as I can possibly get it. But so that's what I'm going to do. This is going to set out. We'll stick these in the fridge and we'll be back. These got to sit, at least my candle has to sit overnight. And if there's any issues with it, I'll show you guys how to fix that later. But until tomorrow, I'll see you guys in a bit. Okay, it has been about 24 hours. These have been sitting in the fridge. This has just been sitting out. Now, something that does happen is why you don't want to stick your candles in the fridge is the wax tends to shrink, so you can already tell that it's pulling away from the sides. That happens when it hits the cold, so unfortunately with candles, it can actually crack your wax, and you don't want to have that happen in your candles. For things like this, it's just totally fine because I will be remelting this and to use in a candle later on. So that is my wax brick. It will hold up really, really well. I can just set it aside, and I can use that for later. Now you can use candy silicone molds like I've got here. You can also use cupcake silicone tins as well, and those really hold up. You can make larger wax pucks, you can do wax tarts, and you can end up having several different kinds of designs if you wanted to. I really do like using the silicone because it pops out really, really easily. These are easy to wash. And if you have a little bit of a sinkhole or a melting spot like this one has a tiny bit there, if I hold it in the light just right, then you can actually take your heat gun and flatten those right out, and they look really, really classy. I'm just going to go ahead and set these aside for right now. I don't really need them at the moment, but I can use them in a wax warmer if I want to. So I've got my candle. Now I'm really happy that I did pour it a little bit cooler, but it still got a little bit of a sinkhole there. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten the tops. I filled this up just a little bit too full, so that excess on the sides is going to work perfectly fine for helping to fill in that little bit of a hole. Now do not use a hairdryer when doing this, because what can happen is that hairdryer blows hot air, and that blowing around of the wax will actually cause a splashback. And folks, trust me, you definitely do not want to have waxicles hanging off your eyelashes, eyebrows, nose hairs, ears hairs. You look like you've been in a wax apocalypse. Trust me, it's one laughing matter that you will never live down. So nowadays I use a heat gun. I actually did pick this one up at Harbor Freight, so you can, it's got two different settings on there. I tend to use the lighter one because I don't need to have it so hot. I just need it to melt the wax. I don't know if you can tell, but that wax is starting to already fall into the center of that hole there, and it's already starting to fill that in real nice. I really should use gloves when I'm working with a heat gun, because these containers do get rather hot. And that's looking pretty good. I still got a high point right there I want to melt down. Now I'll just let that set aside, and that will cool off, and hopefully we will get a flatter top. Now I did another candle here, and as you can tell, I poured the wax way, way, way too hot. So now I've got a huge sinkhole. Now, if I had wax tarts of this kind, I'd probably just set a wax tart in there and just heat gun melt it, and then that would fill in the hole. You can also do an add back where you can remelt some wax, like I've got from like this brick. You can remelt that, pour it in, and that will help to fill in the holes, but I don't have that for this candle currently. Now this does happen again when you pour your wax too hot, so you want to avoid that as much as possible. So hopefully, I'll just bring you in a little bit. Maybe you can see this a little bit better, this process. And I'm just going to go ahead and just start heat gunning the top of this candle. What'll happen is you'll start to see kind of like rivers starting to get shiny there. Oh, there's the rivers. So I'm just going to go ahead and work that heat gun all around the edges. That's just going to start falling down into that hole there. This does take some time. Add back really does help, so at least you can, fill it in a little bit quicker. And this one's going to take a little bit longer, because that is a pretty bad hole from the way it's looking. Funny thing is, the wax has a tendency to grab onto the wick, and it grabs onto the sides of the glass. But if it's too hot, it's gonna fall. And kind of like a cake when you pull it out of the oven too soon. So wax has that tendency. It's natural, it's normal, that's just how it behaves. So again, this is what you can do to fix that problem if you do end out having it. You also want to flatten your tops as best you can, because if you tend to light your wick before your candle has had a time to flatten out, what's going to happen is that flame is going to come down, and with that concave V-shaped in the middle, you're actually going to start melting the wax, and that wax is going to fall in on your flame and put your candle out. So you definitely want to make sure you have things as flat as you can get it, because that will keep the candle from putting itself out in the meantime, and make sure it has a nice, clean, long-lasting burn. And this is looking pretty good at the moment. So I'm just going to go ahead and set this aside. I'm going to turn this for you. You can still see where I've got some of the high points, so I'll need to come back and just reflatten that. But for now, I'm just going to let this sit. I've got some air bubbles coming up the side there as well. So when I reheat gun this, the center will all solidify. It'll be beautiful and nice and flat, and it will be ready to go. And also reheat gunning it will take care of any air bubbles. So here we go. We've got just a tiny bit there that's all solidifying up. And all I have to do now is just clip my wick with some nail clippers to 1/4 of an inch, and this will be ready to go. So we'll be back in a bit, and I'll show you guys how well these remake candles really do burn. Well, this concludes my video. I hope you guys enjoyed it and maybe learn how to remake your own candles and turn them into beautiful works of art. If you like this video, come back for more tips and tricks later on. Bye now.